Mohammed Shoaib. Hi viewers, just information video on public today news or YouTube ads friendly. Alright, what's the situation like where you are now? Well, alley behind me you see basically the same park, the same square that I took that footage of very early this morning around 5:30 and what may seem like a normal day here in Labi. People out, as you mentioned earlier, you can hear the busker playing music in the background. This is a defiant city. I think this is a show of force in any way that they can, as the attacks that have persisted all across this country extend here to the west of the country as well, with that airport maintenance facility being struck by Russian airstrikes just a couple of days ago. Just a real quick update on Mariupol. You had mentioned the 400 or so people in that art school, which was doubling as a shelter that had come under attack. Local officials are saying now that there may yet be people buried in the rubble there, and the rescue efforts continue in order to find anybody they can as quickly as they can. You know, something struck me that you mentioned earlier. Every day civilians taking up arms, and I think maybe people back at home might think this is some kind of army reserve people who had been in the armed forces in the past. From what I can tell from the people I've talked to, this is everybody that feels like they can and should and want to contribute to Ukraine's resistance against that Russian invasion. I told you in the last hour I was in the apartment of 7 young Ukrainians earlier this week who had fled Kiev once the attacks there began. They sort of have a communal living type of situation going on now, sheltering in the hallway, taking care of one another. Those 7 are now down to 6. One of them, Dimitro, has decided to pick up and go back to Kiev to enlist there in the capital as still as it comes under attack in order to fight back against the Russians. I mean, that's one story that I've heard, one story I've communicated to you, but it's something that continues to play out every day in every city in this nation as thousands flee, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions are internally displaced here. Ali, inside this country. You make an interesting point that I was hoping to get to with David Miliband, and that is, for all the refugees we talk about, there's probably twice the number of people inside Ukraine who are not in their homes, who are in a different city, whose kids are not in school, and that's something we have to think about as well. Jacob, thank you. Stay safe. Jacob Sobrov, MSNBC correspondent, live in Lviv. Joining me now is Angela Stench. She's the director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian and East European Studies at Georgetown University. She's also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a former U.S. National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia. She's also the author of the book Putin's World, Russia Against the West and with the Rest. Angela, good to see you again. Thank you for being with us. I have to ask you, we talk about the unity that the world has come together on against Russia and the sanctions, and we're not quite there with the Europeans. You're deciding to not buy energy from Russia, but we might get there this week with Joe Biden coming to Europe. Here's my question for you. China is not distancing itself from Russia. In fact, it's doing the opposite. It almost feels like it's standing up in favor of Russia right now. And that's a big deal when you lose all your friends, but you still have China. You can survive, and it's not only China, Ali. I mean, as the subtitle of my book, it's against the West and with the rest. So much of the rest of the world has not condemned Russia for this. It's not only China, its biggest supporter. It's a country like India that won't condemn it. It's countries in Latin America, in the Middle East, South Africa, other African countries to the west is certainly isolated Russia, and we've imposed very tough sanctions on them, but it's so hot. Russia still has lifelines. I think China would be the main one, but other countries that are going to continue to trade with Russia and are not going to condemn it in the United Nations or anywhere else. I just spoke to an assistant to the Deputy Prime Minister who was saying that the Russian and European energy sanctions will be a very big deal. Obviously, as you know, I'm here in Hungary, where Viktor Orban, who's up for election in 3 weeks, re-election in 3 weeks, says it's a non-starter to even discuss it. There are other European countries that may soften on that. Will that make a very big difference if Europe stops buying energy, natural gas, oil and coal from Russia? How much does that change things? Oh, that would make an enormous difference. I mean, Russia, we've always thought of it's a nuclear superpower, an energy superpower. It's probably not going to be an energy superpower going forward, particularly if the Europeans would agree essentially to sanctions on Russian oil and natural gas, or at least begin with the natural gas, so that, as AI would say, an argument that's going on now within Europe. It's obviously something the Ukrainians are really pushing for, trying to figure out how this could be implemented. Of course, Mr. Orban is another person who hasn't condemned Mr. Putin, so we'll just have to wait and see whether they're able to get together, but I suspect that the pressure is going to be on now, at least for the Europeans, to think about moving away from importing Russian natural gas. And while we're talking about pressure, what's the pressure on Vladimir Putin? feeling like right now, and what do you think? How do you think he reacts? The ground army is stalled. I don't know whether they had bad planning or bad intelligence or just a bad military, but it does seem that they're now increasing airstrikes and missile strikes. Russia is still a big army. Russia's still a powerful military. Does he feel backed into a corner, and is he going to get more aggressive as a result of this? I don't know if he feels back into a corner. He had a very defiant speech on Friday again, celebrating 8 years since he annexed Crimea, talking about his religious motivation in this was a fight against the satanic West. Obviously the sanctions are already hitting ordinary Russians are feeling them, rich Russians are feeling them. As you said, the military hasn't done nearly as well as he thought. It wasn't a blitzkrieg. They're still sort of grinding on. They're getting more indiscriminate in what they're doing, but he's going to continue. He is going to double down. At the moment, there is nothing at the moment that's going to stop him, and we'll just have to see. Maybe when the sanctions hit even more in a few weeks' time, that might change the calculus for him, but at the moment it doesn't seem as if he's willing to give on anything. We appreciate your analysis and your deep knowledge and experience of this. Angela Stent is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, the author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and with the Rest, the Europe. The US government, by the way, is here in Europe. Several lawmakers have made their way to Europe searching for the solution. They will be joined by President Biden himself later this week, plus a member of the Ukrainian parliament has a message for the world. Quote, I want you to learn what happens when a rocket hits your home. Vice News correspondent Isabel Young. Her reporting focuses on conflict zones. Isabel, thank you for being with us. We appreciate this. You've been documenting and tweeting some of the things you've seen. I believe you were in Mikhail when you took some of these images, but what's the situation first of all in Odessa? Right now they know that an approach or an attack is likely to come, but what's going on in Mykolaiv seems to be slowing Russian forces from entering Odessa. Yeah, exactly. I mean, here in Odessa it's a bit of a waiting game. I mean, a lot of people are predicting an imminent attack. President Zelensky has said that an attack is on its way, but at the moment that hasn't happened. We haven't seen the heavy bombardment that we've seen in other cities around Ukraine. People are preparing for the worst. As you can see from your images, people are building up sandbags. A lot of civilians are training, picking up guns for the first time. There's really a drastic turnaround in the way the Odessans are kind of going about their daily lives, and just sort of a nervous tension in the air, and people sort of preparing for the worst. I want to show our viewers a photo. You talk about a young woman being shown how to use a weapon, and why I want to discuss this is because we've certainly talked to parliamentarians who have said they've taken up arms and joining their territorial defense force, but this is happening everywhere across this country. People who have otherwise never touched a firearm in their lives are being trained in acquiring weaponry. Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to imagine just how drastically these people's lives have changed in the last few weeks. I mean, this woman is called Anastasia. She's just 20 years old. I mean, just a few weeks ago she was working with animals. She was at home with her pet dog and her pet snake, and had young women issues to think about, and now she is picking up guns. She's going through tactical training. Her life has just taken a complete 180, as have pretty much all Ukrainians lives over the last few weeks. In some cases it's more serious than that. You also tweeted a picture of body bags laying in front of a market. I want to put that up. I want to warn our viewers, it's hard to watch, but tell me about this. Yeah, so we spent the last few days in the city of Mykolaiv, which is towards Kherson, away from Odessa, and as you said, the Ukrainian troops there are putting up a pretty strong defense and preventing the Russians from taking Mykolaiv and progressing further towards Odessa. But yeah, this photo that you saw was a picture that I took at the site of an attacker apartment block in the city. We went to that apartment block about 45 minutes after it was attacked, and there were still bodies strewn across the streets, and we were actually with them there, and we went to the place where the rockets had landed, and we were able to identify that cluster munitions were used in this civilian area. A number of individuals were died. We saw a lot of casualties streaming into the hospital, and a lot of civilian casualties. I mean, these munitions are banned by most countries around the world because of the extremely indiscriminate form of attack of casualties that they cause. So it's a really dire situation for a lot of the civilians living there. And we also went to the morgue, and we saw a lot of casualties, a lot of fatalities. I mean, bodies were piled up on top of each other both inside and outside of the morgue, and families trying to identify their loved ones, just trying to piece together their lives in just an impossibly dire situation. I do want to ask you about the fact that the world has watched the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, go from a guy they knew to be an entertainer to a guy who they a lot Of critics thought was not up to a fight with Vladimir Putin to some sort of leader of the democratic world. You interviewed him a few years ago when he was doing a stand-up act. Yeah, I did. I mean, I have to say I think like everyone else kind of underestimated him. You know, this was a guy who was a stand-up comedian and we were with him backstage as he was prepping to go and do his skit out on the stage, and yeah, no one I think expected him to be in this position now, which is someone that, you know, even the Ukrainians I think who weren't massive fans of him have kind of come around to the idea of him and you know, is somewhat of a hero in this country. So yeah, a complete 180 for him as well. I mean, it's been pretty incredible to witness him kind of standing up to the challenge that he's facing right now. Isabel, thanks very much for your amazing reporting and the images that you are sending out via Twitter, and I recommend our viewers follow you so they can see firsthand the things that you are bearing witness to. Isabel Young is a Vice News correspondent in Odessa now. Yeah, I've heard from some people who tweet me to say can't watch this anymore. It's too hard. As difficult as it is to watch the images of war play out on TV, it's hard to truly encapsulate the trauma and the violence of the things that we're seeing. Kira Rudik is a member of the Ukrainian parliament and she's been a leading voice for the Ukrainian people. She's showing the world exactly what's happening to her country. She posted this to Twitter after a Russian attack on an apartment building in Kiev. Kira Rudik joins me now from Kiev. As I said, she's a member of the Ukrainian parliament, the leader of the Holos political party. Ms. Rudik, thank you for being with us again. I want to point out something that you tweeted the other day. When there are discussions about the negotiations that might be going on or could go on between your country and Russia, and this discussion about Russia being really aggravated by Ukraine wanting to join NATO, you said, kind reminder, that in 2014 Ukraine did have neutral status that did not prevent Putin from invading Donbass. So now this demand is another of his BS. His goal is to rebuild the USSR or Russian Empire and not some words on the paper. Stop Putin now. You make an interesting point that Ukraine's never been a member of NATO, right, and now we do have an intention to join NATO, which is written in our constitution, and this alone aggravates Putin that much that he's saying that he started the war because of this. So NATO so far never offered us a membership, and this is why I think that all the negotiations and all the demands on Russia's side that we need to forfeit their aim to become a NATO member, and that we need to get back to their neutral status as we had it before. It's just like another talks. It doesn't have anything to do with the reality. This is number one, and as I wrote, we did have a neutral status in 2014, and after Russia invaded Donbass, the whole world was hoping that it will go away. Somehow it did not, which proves for us and for all the other countries right now that first of all, you cannot hope that the dictator will go away or will resolve or will change his plans. Putin was very blunt about it. He said that he denies Ukraine and Ukrainian people a right to exist. And this is why we know that this war will be till either Russia collapses or he conquers Ukraine and then Poland and then Lisbon, Lithuania. This is much more global than just hoping that he will take some of our territories and then say, okay, just remove this word from your constitution and I will be fine. And it's very naive to hope that changing the constitution or having any kinds of agreements with him will help, because there is another level of these negotiations. Is who in the world would be a guarantee for Putin, who will make sure that he will keep his word. And right now I don't see the huge line of countries saying, okay, we will vouch for him, and without that there will be an ongoing war on my land, will be ongoing war with my people, and this is why we will continue fighting him, because we see no other way right now to resolve this. I may have a map that I can show my viewers. We haven't talked about Belarus for a long time, but you have made the point that other Belarusians have left Belarusian officials. Government officials have left Kiev, and you're a little bit concerned that they might actually join this fight. Obviously Belarus is closely aligned to Russia. They think of themselves as a union state, the kind of thing that Russia would like to make Ukraine into. What does that mean if Belarus gets into this fight? What does that mean to you in Ukraine? So first of all, we anticipated that Belarus would join Russia in the garlic from the very beginning. The fact that they have not done that, it just means that Lukashenko had another level of negotiations with Putin and probably had a very good bargain. Right now we anticipate that Belarus will get into war probably beginning of the next week, and although they don't have a large army, and I'm very sure that many Belarus Russian people will refuse to fight, we know that they will basically open the second front for us, so from the north and west, where they will try to attack us cities like Rivne and other regions of my country. So we anticipated that, and our intelligence is very sure that this will happen within the next 2 to 3 days. Kira Rudik, I hope you're not correct about this, but everything you've told us about so far has been correct. Kira Rudik is a Ukrainian member of Parliament. She's a leader of the Holos political party. Thank you for your time again today. Earlier this morning we caught up with a Japanese student who lives in Budapest who's got a pretty simple equation to ending the conflict. In neighboring Ukraine, music. This is most important thing to stop war, to make world peace, because hate will create a new hate, so we have to use our wad, and we don't need to use weapon. Joining me now is the Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski of New Jersey. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees. He was born in Communist Poland during the height of the Cold War when he was 6. He and his mother fled to the United States. He's also served on the National Security Council in the Clinton administration and as a State Department diplomat in the Obama administration. Congressman, it's good to see you again. You of course are watching this very closely, not just as a congressman but as an expert on this in the State Department, and it's a little bit personal to you as it is for a lot of people who come from this part of Central and Eastern Europe that borders or was part of the former Soviet Union. Give me a sense of where you think we are in this and what more America can and should be doing. Well, it is personal to me, and it should be personal to every American actually, because the Ukrainians are fighting for our freedom, for our security, as much as they're fighting for their own. We've done a great deal. We've helped the Ukrainians defeat Russia's initial plan, which was to take over Kiev in a few days to get rid of the democratically elected government, to impose an occupation that has been defeated absolutely clearly, but we're entering a phase that could still be very, very dangerous as Putin considers a very, very bad set of options from his point of view. What we need to do is keep the flow of arms to the Ukrainian defenders. Continue scouring the world for countries that have weapons that the Ukrainians are trained on that they can use, particularly air defense systems. I'm glad the administration is now doing that and continue to ratchet up the sanctions. There's still a few things that we can do that I think would make the effort even stronger than it is today, and have confidence in what we're doing. Some of the things that can be done, some of that headroom that we've still got in sanctions comes more from European countries than America, because America's just not that big a trading partner of Russia's compared to European countries. What do you think success looks like for Joe Biden as he comes to Europe this week? Obviously he's trying to use his decades of experience to negotiate a ratcheting up of that sanctions, but what would you say would be success for him? Number one, there are still European countries that have weapon systems, particularly our Eastern European allies, that the Ukrainians need, and we need to encourage those countries and help them arrange those transfers as quickly as possible. Number two, you're right that the Europeans are still, and they would acknowledge this, overly dependent on Russia for energy supplies. It's therefore harder for them to move as quickly as we have moved to ban the importation of Russian oil, but I think they've recognized that this is something that they have to do on a much faster timeline than they would have been comfortable before, and there are things the United States can do for them, for the Europeans, to ease the burden, to ease the blow that they will suffer. We also have to talk about scenarios going forward. This could go well. We could have a negotiation where the Ukrainians find some sort of agreement with the Russians, a ceasefire, and end to the war. That would be the best case scenario, and we have to talk about how we would react to that in terms of the sanctions, but it could also go in a very dark and scary direction if Putin decides that his only way out is actually to expand the conflict by testing NATO Article 5, and so in a way the most important thing the president will need to do is to maintain that unity, that determination among European allies to have the nerves of steel that we will need if he does test us in that way. Congressman, there are a number of conservative far-right media personalities who've been on the wrong side of this thing, including Tucker Carlson. There have also been some of your colleagues in Congress. Josh Hawley said some things, Madison Cawthorn, and then finally Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has said that peace agreements have been violated by both Russia and Ukraine. Finally, your colleague Liz Cheney, a Republican, called her out by that, saying Putin is targeting and slaughtering civilians in a brutally unprovoked war against Ukraine, a sovereign democratic nation. Only the Kremlin and their useful idiots would call that a conflict in which peace agreements have been violated by both sides. What's your sense of the fact that there is an influential group of American conservatives who are entirely on the wrong side of this thing? They have been on the wrong side for years. These are people who admired Putin, who thought he was a strong leader, who thought he was a model for America. And look, it's easy to dismiss people like Marjorie Taylor Greene as just being crazy and fringe, but the fact is that in the next Congress there will be more people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, because they are winning Republican primaries around the country. The fact remains that the likeliest Republican standard bearer for president in 2024 is somebody who tried to pull America out of NATO when he was last president of the United States and who said that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was an act of genius. So I have a lot of Republican colleagues who are solid on Ukraine. Who'd like to find some way to paint Joe Biden as weak. Their problem is not Joe Biden, their problem is in their own party. Their problem is that Fox News is broadcasting Russian propaganda to millions of Americans every single night. And so yeah, it does worry me. We're solid, we're bipartisan in the Congress now, but there is a debate in the Republican Party that needs to be resolved and in favor of America, our allies, and democracy, and it has not yet been resolved. Mohammed Shoaib, Congressman, we always appreciate your insights. Thank you for joining us. Congressman Tom Malinowski is a Democrat of